Yo!
We are back!
You know what? Frankly, Dylan and I have been doing this remotely for quite a while. This in-person chemistry we gotta work on. We're so fired up to be back live with Next Gen-HQ Season 2. We have an absolute legend of a guest today, like absolute beast mode of a human being. But before we get to that, Dylan, like, are you fired up for the season? It's gonna be incredible.
I have been counting down the days until Season 2's launch for actually 100,000 years. It's insane.
100,000 years.
We have missed you, fam. We appreciate you. We send our love and our best wishes to you. We could not be more excited to get back in the game. And again, with quite a heavy hitter to start us off. We'll get there in a second. But
absolute beast.
How you feeling?
Entrepreneurs are realizing, all right, it's September. COVID is still happening. Things are still going on. And they are looking to dig deeper than ever to find the inspiration, the resources they need to keep building their dream, keep going for what they're working on. And we see you out there, entrepreneurs. Mal,
return.
Mal is the return. Mal, we see you out there specifically trying to close deals, trying to build the empire, build the engine. And let's make some magic happen. Should we let this absolute rock star in, or do you have any other?
I think this gentleman coming on board, for those in the Next Gen universe, you know him, you've seen him before, and you've been amazed by him every single time. Patrick Lee, the co-founder, first CEO of Rotten Tomatoes. He is an entrepreneur. He's an advisor. He's a mentor. He's been so impactful for Justin and my journey. It's been a pleasure learning from him, and we cannot wait to share some of those learnings with our audience out there. So Jenna, please bring Patrick to the stage. Let's get him on. Patrick, welcome to Live with Next Gen HQ. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Patrick, many in the Next Gen world have gotten the opportunity to learn from you, hear you speak, but we want to take it back at the beginning. Pre-Rotten Tomatoes, you and a couple of buddies in school, you're working on something else, and you guys happen to love movies. I know Rush Hour is something you guys are messing around with. So, Pat, walk our audience. Angel's like Season 2, I can't wait for this. Walk us back in time to what was going on before Rotten Tomatoes, you and your buddies trying to figure things out.
Right. So right before Rotten Tomatoes, we were doing a design firm. So we were doing a lot of work for the entertainment industry, tons of stuff for Disney Channel. We were pretty much the lead developer for Disney Channel. We made like 50 Shockwave games for them. They had this thing they launched at the time. It was called Zoo Disney. We built up the website, a bunch of games and everything to support the launch of the Zoo Disney brand on Disney Channel. We were working with ABC, Warner Brothers, MTV, VH1. So we had a lot of interest already in entertainment. The person that created Rotten Tomatoes was Sen Duong. He was our creative director at Design Reactor. And he was a huge movie buff. Our CTO, Stephen Wang, was also a huge movie buff. I was more of a hardcore, summer blockbuster guy. So I was much more the action movies, sci-fi fantasy stuff that was coming out in the summer. And so Sen, had the idea for Rotten Tomatoes. Basically, he was a huge Jackie Chan fan. A movie called Rush Hour was coming out with Chris Tucker, and Sen wanted to know what all the critics were saying about the movie. So he had this idea where he back then most reviews weren't online, so he just went to the library, grabbed magazines and newspapers, found the review, read the review, wrote down the quote, went back home, and then made the website. From the idea to launch was 2 weeks, and Sen was not a coder, so he was actually building the sites in static HTML. And the main thing that really worked well for it was when he put it out, he was only covering, the wide release movies, which are movies that released the whole US at once, that were coming out that week. So it's typically like 3 or 4 movies a week. So he was able to do that by himself. We're hosting the site for him. And for that first year, I remember very soon, immediately almost got featured on Netscape and Yahoo. It was Pixar released a movie called A Bug's Life. And we saw a spike in traffic that was actually coming from Pixar itself. I think they were all just looking to see what reviews were coming up around their movie. And Roger Ebert, who is a famous film critic, he had written an article for a magazine, Yahoo Internet Life, where he highlighted his favorite movie sites, and Rotten Tomatoes was one of them. And that was all in the first year. And so basically what happened was after that year, we're hosting the site for him, And then Steve and I talk, and we're just like, maybe we should think about doing this as a business. So I went to Sen and I pitched him. I'm like, why don't we all like put all our resources behind this and do it as a business? And he agreed. So we actually took our design firm, gave it to another group to run, and raised $1 million. And we put our entire team of like 20 some people over to Rotten Tomatoes.
That is incredible. Patrick, so many folks in the comments. We have Noel from India, who's the biggest Rush Hour fan of all time, apparently. Dan Russo, Rush Hour is my jam. It sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick, that Rush Hour and Rotten Tomatoes are linked at the hip, right? So how does that feel that you are Rush Hour, right? Patrick Lee and Rotten Tomatoes. That must have been a cool experience looking back as a big fan, or at least for Sen, right?
Yeah. No, it was super cool. It's funny though that the director actually was Brett Ratner. I think he's not a fan of Rotten Tomatoes.
Have you given him poor reviews overall on other of his movies?
I think there are a number of directors that aren't crazy about it. I think the main reason is they just don't like the idea of like all this work that they've done boiling down to one, number. But I think for the users, it helps a lot just because, especially these days, there's just so much content out there. It's not easy to filter through and figure out what you want to watch. And so our whole goal was, saving people time and money from, not seeing a bad movie.
I mean, everybody knows Rotten Tomatoes, and everybody is absolutely resonating with what you're talking about. Before we get to the Rotten Tomatoes action, though, Pat, we have to unpack this context a little bit further, because you have a really good thing going with this design shop, and to make the transition and that pivot to say, hey, we have this idea, unproven, we think it's sexy and cool. You're kind of talking about going from risking the good to shoot for great. And that's something we're constantly talking about Next Gen HQ is how do you, where does that courage come from? What mental frameworks are you thinking about? Because it's a pretty big risk. You guys had something that was already working. So what were the mental processes that you were thinking about as a young person that allowed you to say, you know what, yeah, we got this thing going, but we see this potential to go big here?
So a couple things. One, we had different clients we worked with, and a few of them, sold their companies for, quite decent amounts back then. And so we were talking to them, just getting their advice about things. We had one contact to a VC, a small VC at the time, and we were like, here's just kind of meeting with them and being like, here's some different ideas we're thinking about doing. And we kind of ran Rotten Tomatoes through, and they, the feedback was like, oh, there's something here with Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, that's what we were feeling as well. And so that made it easier. Some of them said they would be willing to put in money. Our design firm, we didn't raise money. We took a small loan from like my mom and my co-founder's uncle. But we never raised money for it. It was growing steadily, actually. We had good clients. But, when you have clients, it's like you don't feel as in control. The growth was steady, but not like nothing like no spike or anything like that, or no hockey stick. And with entertainment, it's really fun, but it's like everything is like we need it yesterday. It's just very rushed. And I think the chance for us to build something that was like our own was just too interesting to us to pass up. And once the investors were like, we're willing to put in money, and the money was coming actually from our clients, basically. Some of the, not the studios and stuff, but some of the other projects we were working on, they knew what we could do, and they saw what we already had with Rotten Tomatoes, so they were willing to put in, and that made it easier. And then we had another firm that we were like passing off extra work to, and we actually passed our design firm off to them and took an equity stake in that company. So it wasn't like we just dumped it for nothing.
Talk about a vote of confidence. If some of your largest clients are championing and saying, go for it, right? Go for it. That is quite the momentum you need to get off the ground. Patrick, getting into the early stages, then you decide we're going to do this, right? We get the money, we raise the $1 million. Your team is your college friend group, right? For the most part. Talk to me about what that was like in the early days of building what is now your second company formally, and you're doing it with your buddies, right? Was that ever a struggle? I know that you were all young and figuring out your own leadership, but how did you decide, okay, you're going to be CEO, CTO? What was that formula process like?
Right. So I ended up overall doing 6 different startups, and every single one of them had at least one friend from college, from freshman year of college.
Wow.
And most of them had multiple friends from freshman year of college. So, a lot of folks say like, don't work with friends, because it can ruin the friendship. And that's definitely true. But at the same time, you're spending more time, with your co-founders or your team, probably than your significant other and your family, right? And so I feel like it's much better to work with friends because you're spending so much time with them and you know them, you can trust them and stuff. And, you won't have any fear of them like screwing you over or something like that. So I think at least for me, it was absolutely the right decision. That was the whole reason why I wanted to do startups in the first place, was because, when people normally they go to college and they just get jobs everywhere and they all split up all over the world, or, and I didn't want to do that. And so that was my way of keeping friends together. As far as the split in roles, it really just came down to personalities. When we were doing stuff, Steven was a CS major and he was really into like more of the coding and everything. And so I naturally just ended up doing more of the sales and business development and hiring and all those other things. So it just people just kind of fell into their different spots. And with Sen, he was our creative director, but then when he came up with the idea for Rotten Tomatoes, he was basically the product person because he designed and worked on the product, and Steven would think about the technical side and like how to automate that and improve it. And then I was on the other side where it was like the investing and the strategy and everything else. So it was really good in that case, especially for Rotten Tomatoes. I think was the best version because the 3 of us, we all knew our roles. We didn't like step on each other's toes. And it was an interesting dynamic because with 3, you could actually put something to a vote and, have 2 against 1. But we chose never to do that. We decided, all 3 of us would need to agree on any major decision. And we would just go into a room and talk it out, sometimes yell it out or whatever for a few hours, sometimes a few days even, to make sure that we were fully aligned. We never wanted to have a situation where someone was, like unhappy with the decision and let that kind of fester.
Patrick, talking about friends, that clearly is resonating. I see Mal and Dubin, 2 guys who are, loving their friends and looking to keep those relationships active. Thinking about, okay, working in the business relationship is just a great vehicle to drive those relationships forward. I mean, obviously I spend like 26 hours a day with this guy. And something that we always think about though is, is the business based on a friendship, or is the friendship really evolved out of the business, and how do those come over time? So just something really interesting to think about. So things are going, you have your friends, you're figuring out the roles, and you're agreeing that, we're all going to align together. We're not going to make these, kind of power fiefdoms. We're going to try to come together, and you're still kind of learning as you're going, and things are good, things are hot. We have Max Cohen in the comments here. Max, shout out to you. Looking forward to speaking to you tomorrow. He's talking about, well, you're still in college or young. How do you know? What are you learning on the job? So before we get into Rotten Tomatoes, what's going on later, what were the skills that maybe you didn't have brought to the table at that early stage? You're all young, you don't have so much experience. You had a design firm, which obviously provided great experience, but were there skills that you didn't have, or were there skills that college prepared you for, or maybe the other way around, where you got there and you're like, I'm locked and loaded. I was learning this stuff in school already.
I mean, for me, I jumped around to a couple different majors. Like I was EECS, switched to CS, switched to business, eventually ended up as CogSci. And to be honest, I haven't used CogSci for any of the startups that I've done. I think the biggest thing for college for me was one, I believe it's the best place to find a co-founder. I mean, obviously for me, but you look at so many of these really great tech startups. I don't know, Facebook, Google, Yahoo, just tons. They were working together with their friends from college, right? So I think that was one. Another thing for college was just learning to be on your own. Up until during high school, I was still living at home, and then when I went to college, I was by myself. So learning to be on your own, learning how to learn kind of on your own, where you can make your own schedule and all that kind of stuff. Because I think that forced independence carries over when you do your own startup. And for us, there's tons of stuff we didn't know. And you just, as an entrepreneur, you kind of trial and error everything. You just try it, how you discuss it, you think it over, you're like, this is how we think we should do it. And you do it, and it's wrong or it's right. And hopefully it's right. But if it's wrong, you actually will learn pretty quickly it's not working, and you'll change it up. So we just kind of bumbled our way in through a lot of things. We would sometimes, with our clients or folks who would kind of give us mentorship, they gave us certain advice, and they might be 10, 20, 30 years senior to us. And they gave us a lot of advice that was also pretty helpful. We didn't always take all the advice, but we took a lot of it, and that really helped. But a lot of it was, just trial and error. Making mistakes was really, I think, the best way for us to learn. And I think entrepreneurs, one of the biggest things with them is they're just super stubborn. I think that's a trait of being an entrepreneur. If you're not stubborn enough and don't believe in yourself enough, I think it doesn't work, because you're going to get so many no's. And so when you are that stubborn, almost the only way to learn really a lot of times is by making a mistake and learning from that. Because even when people are telling you like, no, that's not going to work, they're very resistant to no's, which is generally a good trait, but they have to almost make that mistake and learn from it.
That's so beautiful, Patrick. And I know it resonates strongly for Justin and myself. We fail all the time. And that is not a good thing or a bad thing. It is just how it is as an entrepreneur. But if you're making the time to reflect, right? A Ray Dalioism that we love, pain plus reflection equals progress. Right? You have to make the time to realize, to be aware, and then to learn and move forward. So many in the comments here are grateful to have you here. Dan Russo, Chris Shaw, welcome. We're so excited to have you. Some parallels to the co-founders of Box, Dylan Smith and Aaron Levy, getting to be friends and grow into business partners as well. Patrick, you mentioned some challenges along the way, and I want to go back to now when you started Rotten Tomatoes. You're in the throes of it. You're building this business. You're seeing the successes come through. And one of the topics that Justin and I love to pick the brains of folks like yourself on is what happens after you do have that initial success, right? You have maybe that first really great quarter, or that first strong year. And now it's okay, what's next, right? How are we going to grow this thing? What's the vision looking like for year 2 and 3 and 4? Maybe take us back to some of those early successes on the other side of that failure and how you approached where to go next.
So for us with Rotten Tomatoes, actually very strange. I think we basically, we raised money in January of 2000 and long time ago. And the market crashed 2 months after. It was the internet stock bubble burst. So before 2000, it was just like tons of companies were going IPO, and they were losing tons of money. A lot of people were getting rich quick and all that stuff. And when the market crashed, it felt like 90% of those businesses, just even a lot of them that went IPO, just evaporated. So it was a super crazy time. It was impossible to raise funding at that point for any tech startup. And on top of it, most of the tech startups were reliant on advertising revenue. And that revenue was actually coming from the other tech startups. And so once the money dried up, they couldn't buy ads with each other. So their revenue also dried up. So it's like a really bad mix. That's why so many of them died, was they couldn't raise money and they didn't have any revenue. And when that happens, and a lot of them were very much in the grow super fast mode. And so they have this massive amounts of cost, suddenly no revenue, suddenly no more fundraising. And then they would go out of business. And the ones that kind of made it through are companies like eBay, Amazon. They were making money from the users. And those were much more resilient than the ones that were making it through advertising. We were actually making our money mostly through advertising. So it was pretty tough. But luckily, it happened right as we started. So we were able to make changes. We actually had to cut from 20-something people, 25 people we had on our team, to 7 within a year. And at that point, and even at 7, we had to, everyone took a 30% pay cut. Myself and our marketing person, Paul, went to 0. I was sleeping under my desk, but we did whatever we could to basically get ourselves to break even as soon as possible. And then things seemed like they were getting better. And it was 18 months after the stock market crashed, was 9/11, and that was also super crazy, and that affected revenue as well because a lot of marketing campaigns got pulled. I remember specifically we had a campaign from Spider-Man at the time that was supposed to run, and Spider-Man actually had to pull the trailer to like digitally edit out the towers, and I think the movie was delayed as well. But it's a long time ago. It's not as clear. But yeah, so it definitely, those two things were kind of crazy. And I think for us, in the beginning, we were just focused on like, we just need to stay alive. We just need to stay alive. And so it wasn't so much like we have this win, where do we go from next? It was just like, how do we not die? And I would say nowadays, probably a lot of people are going through the same thing with COVID, because as bad as we had it with the stock bubble bursting, with 9/11, I feel like COVID is worse than both of those combined, maybe times, I don't know, maybe times 10. I mean, it's crazy, especially if you're like in retail, hospitality, travel, or something like that. Like, it's, what do you do when people just stop coming out? I mean, that's the same thing. Your revenue goes to zero, and you have to still pay all this rent and other things. So it's very similar now. Yeah.
Patrick, thank you so much for sharing that story. It gives Illinois the chills to even be thinking about that time period of, all right, you just made this huge transition in. We're going in, Rotten Tomatoes, everybody in, great, let's do it. And then all of a sudden, the whole world starts to feel like shatter and break down. I know that's a moment of your history, a moment of your trajectory that really shifted so much. Talk to us about what you and your friends, co-founders, fellow team members were thinking about. But first, going from 20 to 7, the challenges of people you're working so closely with who are working so hard, that's tough. That's tough. And then all of a sudden, on top of that, you're saying, all right, everybody is going 30. I'm going to 0 pay, and I'm going to move into the office just to make it work. I mean,
right here.
You talk about being stubborn, and look, being stubborn is great. We say, yeah, we're stubborn all the time. That's a different level of stubborn. That's a different level of stubbornness. No, this business is going to survive, and we're going to will it to break even and will it to keep going. What were the conversations like around that time? Were you scared? Were you thinking about, should you jump ship? How are you emotionally tackling that moment of your journey?
Yeah, it was really hard. I remember what we ended up doing was, there was like a minimum kind of like skeleton crew that we could run with, which basically the 7 of us, that we felt like we could have probably gone down to 3 even, but we felt like if we go down that far, we can't run it as a business anymore. So we stuck with 7. We talked to each of the 7 of us, and we're like, please, if you can, please stay. We really need you to stay to continue running this. For everyone else, we told them what happened. We accelerated vesting on some of their equity. We basically kept them employed, but told them to please start looking at like as soon as you can, until they found something, so that they didn't have a gap. And even now, we're in touch with just about everybody. We still, when COVID hit, we did like 2, big group Zoom chats just to keep in touch with folks, because we ran it like a family. And so, but it was definitely a tough time. I remember one of the people, she was like, she really wanted to stay, and she was willing to go to 0 and everything. But we just felt like we couldn't like quite manage that at the time. So we still tried to have her look for something. It was hard. Yeah, and I'm trying to think back more. Yeah, and as far as like moving into the office and everything, we had a lot of space. We had space for 25 people, and we had all these cubes. And suddenly most of the cubes are empty. So I remember I took 3 cubes and just put all my stuff into the shelves and the drawers, so you couldn't actually see anything. And so if you just went by in the day, it just looks like, an office cubicle. But at night, I had the little pull-out mat thing that I could sleep in. And luckily, the building we were in, there's a nice bathroom just down the hall. and then downstairs there was a gym with a shower. So yeah, so it was doable. I mean, it was, I guess, technically illegal, but we couldn't get out of our lease, because no one's going to let you out of lease during that time, and unless you go like declare bankruptcy. So the way I thought about it was like, I'm just combining working super late with coming in super early. I mean, there was times the security guy opens up the door and you're just like, oh yeah, I'm still working, because luckily when they were coming through, I was, still on my computer and stuff. And yeah, so did that for a little while. And what else? I mean, yeah, it was just, we had to do whatever we could to keep things on. The one thing also that made it easier for us to do it was, even though everything outside was going crazy, internally we could still see that our traffic and our revenue, after like an initial dip, and our brand were all continuing to increase. Definitely quarter over quarter. A lot, most of the time month over month. It'd be a little bit spiky, but it was spiky moving up into to the right, and so that made it easier because we knew, like, internally things were still improving, even if externally everything else was going bad. Yeah.
Patrick, on behalf of everybody over here, thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing that story. Bobby, Andrew, Malachi, Emma in the comments, Rachel saying how thankful they are to hear from you. Justin and I, we get to meet a lot of young entrepreneurs, and it's truly one of the best pieces of our job. But it's sometimes a misconceived vision of what entrepreneurship holds, right? People see the Forbes covers, they see the $1 billion exits, and they think entrepreneurship is all glory and winning, and you get the dream and the yacht and the private boat, whatever it is, right? They don't hear that behind the incredible site, Rotten Tomatoes, that every single person legitimately on the face of the earth knows about, that this was in the background. This was in the early 2000s happening. So we truly appreciate you shedding that light and sharing that. And what is most inspiring is that you were able to continue on and succeed to the point that this website still exists, right? So you're living in your office, you're sleeping under your desk, but you see this encouraging result that you're getting the traffic, the viewership is there. 2004, you end up selling the company for a nice payday, right? What happens to get to that point, right? You realize there's potential here. You see the viewership going up. The revenue, you got to figure out a little bit. You stick on the journey. Talk to us about how you lead to an exit and that win for your team.
Yeah, so we actually had gotten offers at least a year, maybe 2 years before. Basically, once we kind of got ourselves break even, we started becoming a little bit profitable. Folks were starting to like sniff around. I remember, I think it was iFilm, which was kind of like a YouTube before YouTube. They were interested in trying to acquire us, but it was like a very low offer. It was like, I think it was like 10 cents on the dollar kind of thing. And we didn't want our investors to lose money. So we passed on that. There was eUniverse, which is actually the company that kind of helped incubate MySpace. They came around, they were trying to make an offer that included like stock. And we're like, oh, that's kind of interesting. But I remember the timing was weird because right around that time, there was something weird with their stock where it got frozen because of, I don't know, some accounting issues. And we're just like, oh, okay, maybe not. So we kind of backed out of that. But I do remember they were like, yeah, we're working on this thing called MySpace and stuff. And and we're like, oh yeah, that looks interesting. Yeah, it was kind of funny. And then there was IGN, which is the company we eventually sold to. They were a site that focused around gaming, news and reviews and stuff. And they approached us. At first, we were like, oh, we don't know. And I think they approached us maybe a year later with a much better offer. And we took it to our investors. And actually, with our investors, even when we were getting offers of like 25 cents on a dollar.
Stay tuned. The punchline is en route. Okay, the punchline is en route. I need to know. I need to know what happened.
This guy is incredible.
Yeah. And the story, we'll see.
Oh, Patrick, we got you back.
You had such a hook too. So 25 cents on the dollar.
Oh,
second
sorry.
In, you're taking it to your investors.
Oh, sorry. I guess I had some technical issues. Yeah, so we took it to them. They were interested in actually taking the deal, even though they would have lost money on their investment with us. Everything else they invested in basically went to zero during that time. So they're like, oh, well, we can get some cash back. And And then we were like, no, we don't want to lose them money. So our bar was, we at least have to sell for, what we raise money at in terms of valuation. And then IGN finally came in with an offer above that. And we took it to our investors and they're like, yeah. And we did like a tiny bit of negotiation. Again, we didn't really know what we were doing. We kind of trial and errored it. And so we decided to sell it. Obviously, looking back, I think we did make a mistake as far as timing it because, which we didn't know anything about, but we probably undervalued what the property was. We were profitable, so we could have waited indefinitely. But we just thought, oh, it passed that bar, so I guess it makes sense. And even though it was hard, we always figured, oh, we could probably just do it again. And I don't think we realized like, oh, it's actually not easy to make something like a Rotten Tomatoes. There's a lot of luck and timing and everything else that have to go into it. So one of the lessons I learned from that was just we didn't have enough of a network. Myself and my two co-founders, we were all quite introverted. We didn't know public speaking. We didn't go on network or anything like that. And so we just didn't have that like knowledge of what we should do when we had these offers. I mean, our investors gave a little bit of feedback, but I think they were still licking their wounds for the most part. And we didn't really know, like, should we sell, how to sell, the timing, the market, any of that. Do we use a bank? Do we get more competitive offers? Having connections to get more competitive offers? I mean, we had tried to reach out at the beginning of that process to Google. And we just had like a low level person that we tried reaching out to. They never even wrote back. And then when we were about to sell, someone much higher up from Google that we never actually met in person called, just somehow had our number, called and was like, hey, we want to talk. We hear you're trying to sell. But at that point we had already signed a no shop agreement. So it would have been technically like not legal to do it. And so we internally were debating, like, do we try and wait out the no shop agreement to talk to Google, or do we just or talk to Google illegally, or just go through with sale? We didn't want to do something illegal, and we felt it was too risky to wait out the no shop because we had already spent a couple $100,000 in legal fees just negotiating and IGN doing due diligence and everything on our side, because we were working with I think it was Oric, a pretty expensive law firm, and we're like, if we had to wait out the no shop, we would have to eat all those legal fees, which would have used up, I think, all our available cash to then talk to Google to see if they were actually serious or not. And we just felt it was too risky. But then at the same time, looking back, this was before Google went public. And so if we did the deal for just the same amount for stock, like I don't even do the math. I don't look to see what that would be, but I think it would be a big difference. Yeah. So, yeah.
Patrick, so much of your story about Rotten Tomatoes is week after week, month after month, like digging deep to pour more of yourself, your identity, your resource. Like you're all in on this organization. You're working on it with friends. Like, this is like a massive part of your life. It's you. You are this company, and then you sell it. How do you think? How do you emotionally feel after that time? Are you relieved? Obviously, with hindsight now, we see what happened, but the years afterwards, obviously, then you went on to do many other startups, both yourself, helping others, mentoring. But at that time, right when you finish, are you like, what kind of emotional headspace you're in with your identity, having been so much part of that company?
And how long was your first nap?
Yeah, good. Also good question. And how nice was your next bed? Was it a real? That was a real place.
I think for me, at that point in time, it was basically around 5 years or so. And with Rotten Tomatoes, with our design firm, even before that, I had a company that we were selling like computer systems components. So it's like 3 companies in. I think the first one started around 95. So it's like almost 10 years. So I think at that point, I was just like, I want to try something new. I think that's always been part of my personality. And so I decided to go to Asia. I went to China for 3 years. Later on, I did another startup in Hong Kong for 6. And so, and I ended up doing a company with a friend that I did my first company with. So I'm like, I'll jump into do a new thing. I will still work with friends from college. For me, I was born and grew up in the States, and I'm like, what will it be like to actually try another country? And that was exciting. So for me, it was just a very quick transition over. I was happy that we were able to make our investors some money. At that point in time, there wasn't that much activity in terms of companies, selling or doing anything like that. So it felt like a good win for us. And I was just excited to try, the next chapter of my life. So that's what it was for me. Most of the rest of the team actually went over to IGN, and a lot of them also went over to Fox because Fox ended up buying IGN. My CTO, Steven, at the point in time when IGN sold to Fox, I think there was a clause because he was locked in for 2 years, and I negotiated for me to not continue. And I think with IGN, like the CTO was much more critical to keep because like they were the one who knows how to keep it running. Whereas the stuff I was doing, IGN already had people who could do a lot of those things. And so I negotiated to get out, but then for him, once IGN sold to News Corp, he was able to get out, and then he actually left and joined me again in China. And then he actually also stayed with me for my next startup in Hong Kong. And it was cool for him because he ended up meeting someone when he was in China and ended up staying in China even after I moved back to the States. I mean, he recently came back, and he got married and everything. So that was interesting. Yeah.
Patrick, your story is so inspiring. Everyone in the comments here is going to leave with, at the very least, a bit of that curiosity, right? And I hope that Justin and I can be fortunate to always follow our passion and take that where it may guide us, as I know you have many a time in your journey. Patrick, one of our favorite questions that we love to ask our interview guests, it really comes down to what's coming next. So Patrick, in your words, what gets you excited about the next generation of entrepreneurs? The next Patrick Lee, who is graduating college with a few buddies, perhaps, has an idea, has some passion. What are you looking to see in the next few years that's getting you fired up even today when you're mentoring?
I think for me, I've always had interest personally around that intersection of technology and entertainment. There are just so many cool companies in that space. Recently, there's been a lot of, just with Unity going public, with Microsoft buying the company that made Fallout and all that stuff. That was a huge deal. I think that was just a couple of days ago.
Yep.
So that's always been a space that I've personally been interested in. But as far as what I would love to see from the next generation of entrepreneurs, I've been thinking a lot about the problems that we see on the planet these days, with COVID, with, in the States, with the protests, with climate change, in the West Coast. Like the West Coast has been on fire for a while. Like California's been on fire the past 3 years, during the summers and everything like that. And this year it actually went all the way up to like Washington State, right? And one thing I kind of realized was, in my mind, I believe that if there's anything like a silver bullet, I believe it would be education. And the reason why is because, as far as I can tell, just from looking around at my friends and everyone I know, it seems like the more education you have, the later you tend to have kids, and a lot of times the less kids you have. And either one of those will reduce population, right? Like even having the same number of kids, but having them, by the time you're 40 versus by the time you're 20, still reduces population growth, right? So if you help to reduce population, that helps so many things as far as like, food famine issues, disease, climate change in the environment, energy, wars over resources, all that kind of stuff, right? The other thing I feel with education, I think is pretty obvious, is it increases understanding, right? Understanding of issues like like climate change in the environment and believing that or not, or believing whether or not masks work for like COVID or, you know, being able to speak another language, increases understanding, because if two people can actually speak to each other in a language, that helps a lot, right? And then I think the third thing, I'm also with understanding too, it's like, yeah, I'm pretty sure, you know, even someone with like a PhD and a great education, you'll still find people who might be racist or sexist or other issues. But I think as a percentage, it's probably less. I'm pretty sure. And the third thing with education is also it increases your ability to earn. It gives you more options in life, right? And so my thought would be, you know, I don't even think it's enough to make school free, because I believe that the people who need it the most are actually would have to work just to survive. So even if it was free, they wouldn't have the time to even go and do it. I actually think almost like you might even need to like pay people to go to school for the people who need it the most, right? And if you could get the whole world to college level education, or like, let's say you could make everyone in the world as smart as like, I don't know, like a Bill Gates or a Elon Musk, the world would be a completely different place, right? And so my thought is like, how do you do that? I don't have an answer on it, but like, how do you scale that up, right? I mean, there were things in the past, like computers, like the internet, like Wikipedia, right? YouTube in a way, that suddenly get a lot more information to people in a very mass scale way. Like the average person now with internet access and a computer can answer as much as like, you know, 100 years ago, like all the geniuses combined, right? If you let them get on the internet and do some Googling and stuff, right? So that's something I've been wondering about, you know, as an example, like say with like in prison, imagine if people go to prison, they come out, their prospects are very bad, right? Especially once they have a record. But imagine if you went in for whatever it is, say 5 years, 10 years, and instead we're like, you have to get an education. Like it's not an optional thing. Like you have to get it. And when you get it, like can even reduce a sentence, or maybe as you're getting it, we'll even pay you. So you come out of prison, you have a college degree, and you have some money. Like the chance of you going back probably is a lot less. I mean, I haven't done the research, but I would bet you it's less, right? So same kind of thing. Like how would you get the folks with the lowest, like how do you get the bottom in terms of education up, rather than, you know, the rich get richer and all that stuff, poor get poorer, but how do you go from the bottom and lift that up to the point where, you know, you can reduce that gap? I don't know. So this is something I've been thinking a lot about. And for anyone out there who's thinking about being an entrepreneur or whatever, like Bill Gates puts a ton of money into stuff. One of the initiatives he has is education. Chan Zuckerberg, you know, Mark Zuckerberg's foundation puts a ton of money into education. Lauren Powell Jobs, you know, Steve Jobs' wife, tons of money into education. There is lots of money. If you could figure out a good way to be like, here's how we educate like Africa, or here's how we educate a lot of like, you know, the flyover country or whatever in the States or something like that. Here's how we can get everyone to like college level education. The money is there if you actually have a good way of doing it. Yeah.
Entrepreneurs, you heard it from Pat right here.
Fired up.
I know Mal's right now. Like Mal's on his notepad. He's like, all right, I got those 5 ideas. Let me start banging them out. Seeing, I'm going to pitch Chan Zuckerberg. I'm going to cold email him tomorrow. Entrepreneurs, there are a lot of problems that need to be solved. And I think Pat just gave so many great examples of potential really areas to focus on if you're looking to go to the next level. Pat, we unfortunately got to let you go. Before we do, tell me this. You know, what are the key resources, key links, key books that you want to flag? You're like doing a final note to all these entrepreneurs out there who are like, wow, Pat's story has beyond inspired me. Where can they get in touch with you? What do they need to learn? What are the best resources for them as we let you go?
Social media, I'm Rotten, like from Rotten Tomatoes, Doubt, DOUBT, Rotten Doubt, on like Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. You can reach out to me on probably like Instagram or Twitter, and then I can send you a connection request or something if you want to stay in touch, or reach out to Next Gen, and they can put you in touch with me. As far as resources, if you're thinking about entrepreneurship, like Paul Graham's wrote a lot of really good blog posts that are worth reading. I mean, a lot of them are quite old, but they still work today. Venture Hacks, Andrew Chen, he's at Andreessen Horowitz. He's written a lot of great stuff around like growth and marketing tactics. So I think those are some really good ones to start with. And there's plenty of like amazing business books. I personally really like the Steve Jobs biography. I just felt it was just a really super interesting story that I thought was quite inspiring.
Patrick Lee, everybody. Thank you so much, Patrick, for being here, for investing in the next generation, for being a mentor to Justin, myself, and our entire community. We so appreciate the opportunity to sit you down today, and we wish you only the best and continued success in everything ahead.
See you at an event soon, hopefully in person.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I want to be honest with you guys. We've heard Patrick's story before. He's spoken to some of our audiences. Literally every time I'm thinking about
chills.
So he's all in. He's all in on this business. It's a freaking huge business and has to take stubbornness literally to the next level of ultra investing in everything and going all in and saying we're gonna will this thing to success.
Patrick also talked about, Justin, how it takes a little bit of help sometimes, whether that's an investor, an educational resource. Patrick gave some great ideas in education. I want to flag one that made this educational piece possible. Huge shout out to the team at American Express, who will be hosting the Business Class Live Startup for Success Summit. It is incredible. We could not be more excited. This will be a huge one, the Summit for Success, coming October 20th. And thanks to a partnership with Amex, we're giving away $500 too. So if you want to go learn with us, with Patrick, join us, hit the DM. There's a link there in the comments and get your pass. What are you waiting for, right? That's it. We're trying to get better out here.
Get out there. Shout out Amex. Thank you so much to their incredible team for sponsoring this episode of Live with Next Gen-HQ, making this all possible and bringing their Summit for Success to the next generation. It's going to be on October 20th. Reach out to anybody on the Next Gen team. We'll get you tickets. We'll get you their virtual campus, speakers, breakout room.
Insane.
It's going to be incredible resources. What did Patrick say? A big learning of his, he needed more of a network in order to navigate the sale, navigate the growth. This is where you get the network. So sign up for Amex's Summit for Success. We're going to be there. Next Gen is making it happen. And let's continue learning together, figuring out how we can go along.
Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, making season 2's hit a start on fire. We appreciate you. Thank you, Next Gen fam. And until next week, D&J signing out.
Thanks, guys.
Peace.